Okay, so a missionary of genius, the life of Paul, his problems and his predicaments. This is study 10, and what are we going to learn this time about this? Well, last time we left it with problems in Jerusalem. He had finished his third missionary journey. He'd gone to Jerusalem to report to the people there about how well it had all gone, places he'd visited, taken a gift for the poor, and they were absolutely delighted. Then they said to Paul, and that's James and the elders, which would have included various of the apostles, they said to Paul, "You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed. That's really great. Lots of them have believed. We've, in the book of Acts, heard a lot about Paul's missionary journeys and the successes and failures and problems. We don't read much about what was going on in Jerusalem, Judea, and that area, but thousands of Jews had believed, and all of them are zealous for the law." That's fair enough. We've said that it was necessary for the Jewish Christians to keep the law if they were going to witness to their fellow Jews who had not yet believed in Jesus. And, that's exactly what was happening. And they were zealous for the law. How can you be zealous for the law? Well, it's a bit of a burden, but if you think you have to keep it to be righteous in God's eyes, it's a burden. If you know your righteousness is a free gift from God through faith in Christ, you then say, "Oh, thank you, Lord. What do you want me to do? Keep the law. Okay, I'll do my best." Anyway, these Christian Jews in Jerusalem have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to our customs. Now, that's not true. As we have seen, everywhere that Paul's gone, he's always gone first to the synagogue. He's gone to the synagogue every Sabbath day. We saw him circumcising Timothy. We saw him taking a vow at Caesarea just after he left Corinth. No, that's not true. Anyway, James then says, "What shall we do? These Christian Jews will certainly hear that you have come, so do what we tell you. There are 4 men with us who have made a vow." Okay, you take a vow, Pau. You take a vow, all right? "Take these men, join their purification rites, and pay their expenses, so that they can have their heads shaved. Then everyone will know that there is no truth in these rumors about you, but that you yourself are living in obedience to the law." Now, was this blatant lies about Paul, or was it misinformation? Because certainly Paul had been saying that there was no reason for Gentiles to keep the law or to be circumcised. And that was agreed at the Jerusalem Council. So Paul was saying that Gentiles didn't keep the law and not be circumcised, but maybe that had got distorted. Misinformation had got back to Jerusalem. Or maybe there were some non-Christian Jews who were telling blatant lies. I don't know. Anyway, note that this is to appease the Christian Jews in Jerusalem here. They've heard this and they're worried. And if Paul took this vow, they would accept that there was no truth in these rumors, stories, what they'd heard about him. So, some people think this is terrible that Paul took this vow. Well, why? He's already taken one at Caesarea. It was all part of the law of Moses. It was a Nazirite vow. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it at all. It's only those people who think the law was abolished at the cross that have this view. We have to realize that once Christ had made his sacrifice on the cross, any time after that, the law could have been abolished. But it wasn't abolished at the cross. It wasn't abolished at Acts 2. It wasn't abolished at Acts 9. It's not been abolished at this time. So the Jews were correct in keeping it. It was to be abolished, but we'll come to that later. So, problem 1 solved. You go and take this vow. They'll all know that you're keeping the law also. Well, anyway, he tried to keep the vow. He started off, but problem number 2 in Acts 21, 27 to 30. When the 7 days were nearly over for that vow to be completed, some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul in the temple. They stirred up the whole crowd and seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help us! This is the man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law and this place." That's a blatant lie. "And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this holy place." Really? Paul had taken Greeks into the temple? Well, what do they mean by the temple? Come to that in a minute. They had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian in the city with Paul and assumed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Anyway, the result of their false accusations were the whole city was aroused, and the people came running from all directions. Seizing Paul, they dragged him from the temple, and immediately the gates were shut. Lots of references to temple there. Holy place. Anyway, we'll deal with that in a moment. Note these were the non-Christian Jews from Ephesus. And remember that Paul had run into trouble with them after he'd been in the synagogue for 3 months. Now, Trophimus was from Ephesus, so did they know him? And did they recognize him? And what did they mean by the temple? And which gates were shut? Well, here on the left is a plan of the temple. There's quite a number of these. They all vary slightly, but this is good enough to explain. You see, there would have been nothing wrong with Paul taking Trophimus into the outer courts of the temple. So they can't be referring to that. The outer courts of the Gentiles, that's what it was called, the court of the Gentiles. And any Gentile could go into the Jerusalem temple and into these outer courts. That's fair enough. Lots of God-fearing Gentiles, those Gentiles we talked about who attended the synagogue but hadn't become circumcised and hadn't become proselytes, converts to Judaism, they could go up to Jerusalem and they could see the temple, they could go into the outer courts. But the issue is it's the inner courts, blown up at the diagram on the right. That section there that you see on the right, no one could enter there, no man could enter there unless he was circumcised. There's the beautiful gate on the right that leads into the court of the women. And in the court of the women was the temple treasury. So men could go into the court of the women. It's called the court of the women because that's as far as women could go. So men would go into the court of women, perhaps to give a gift to the temple in the treasury. Or they would go further into that very small court in the middle called the court of Israel, or the court of the men. That's where they would go if they wanted to produce a sacrifice, a lamb, or like Mary and Joseph did with the baby Jesus, two small pigeons. They would then hand them over to the priests, and the big section on the left is the court of the priests. And in that middle bit you can see the altar where they made the burnt offerings, the sacrifices. Then there's a building inside there with the holy place and the most holy place. That was fashioned on the tabernacle. And the most holy place at the back, only the high priest could go there once a year. So that is a section where they're saying that Paul has taken Trophimus into that. And when they talked about the gates being closed, those are the gates they're locking. They hauled Paul out of that inner section because that's where he must have been, maybe going to the court of the women, or maybe going into the court of Israel to see the priests, to check on everything. I don't know. But they took him out of that place and they locked all the gates. Anyway, there was such a commotion that I'm going to go back a minute, if I can. Right, you're going to go back to the Roman commander, because next to the temple was the Antonia fortress, which looked over into the temple grounds. And they always kept an eye on that, the Romans, because the temple grounds were a place where there were lots of things going on, disturbances, plots. And the soldier on duty no doubt told the commander about this. So the commander rushes down and rescues Paul. Paul asks the commander if he could speak, and the commander says, well, yeah, okay, fair enough. And Paul speaks to the crowd in Aramaic, which had been the local language, and that calmed them down. Anyway, he told them a bit of his story, but when he got to the bit in verse 21, then the Lord said to me, go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Ah, dear me, the crowd listened to Paul until he said this. Then they raised their voices and shouted, rid the earth of him, he's not fit to live. This is the reaction you get from some of these Jews. They hated the Gentiles, and to think that God would send Paul to the Gentiles, oh no, that was anathema. It really got out of hand. And so the commander ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks to protect him. Okay, let's get him out of the way from this mob. We'll look after this renegade, this guy, whoever he is. And he directed that Paul be flogged and interrogated in order to find out why the people were shouting at him like this. So the soldiers took Paul, they strapped him on the bench, and they were about to flog him when he says to them, is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty? Or bells go. Oh gosh, this guy's a Roman citizen. So they go off and tell the commander, he's a Roman citizen. Oh, is he, says the commander. Commander comes in and says, you're a Roman citizen? Yes, says Paul. So am I. I bought my citizenship. Oh, I was born with Roman citizenship, says Paul. At pretty much a higher level. A better citizen, that is, to be born a Roman citizen rather than to buy it. So the commander has to free him. The next day, the commander calls the Sanhedrin together on Paul, and he wants to hear both sides of the story. Anyway, the high priest, after Paul has just said one sentence, tells somebody to hit him in the mouth. And Paul retaliates by calling this high priest a whitewashed wall or a whitewashed sepulchre. And somebody says to him, how dare you say that to the high priest? Oh, Paul says, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was the high priest, because the law says you must not speak ill of your leaders. So you see, Paul's still keeping the principle of the law here, still keeping the law, and he apologizes immediately to the high priest. Anyway, it wasn't going too well. So then Paul decides to play a political card and announce that he's a Pharisee. So all the Pharisees started supporting him, and all the Sadducees started protesting against him. So the Sadducees and the Pharisees are arguing. The Sadducees said he's guilty. The Pharisee says he's innocent. Oh dear, oh me. And the dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces. And he ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks. Oh dear me, this is bad, isn't it? Well, however bad it was, Paul must have been pretty upset and pretty worried, because verse tells us the following night the Lord stood near Paul and said, take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. Oh, that must have been good news to Paul, because he wanted to go to Rome. When he was in Corinth, he wrote to the Romans saying that he planned to go and see them. He wanted to go and see them. Now the Lord had told him, you will testify me in Rome. Oh, I bet he could have a good sleep after that. Anyway, don't know if he could have a good sleep, because in Acts 23, 12 to 13, the next morning, the Jews, these were the the Jewish leadership, no doubt, and those non-Christian Jews who hated Paul, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 men involved in this plot. Somehow or other, the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, And we had said earlier that maybe when Paul went to Jerusalem, he had a sister there. Family was there. So when he went to sit at the feet of Gamaliel, he was staying with family. Anyway, this nephew of his went into the barracks and told Paul. So Paul sent his nephew to tell the commander. So what did the commander do about it? Well, he decided to send Paul down to Caesarea to the governor. That would have involved a journey from Jerusalem down to Antipatris and then on to Caesarea. But this is incredible. In Acts 23:13-24, the commander called 2 of his centurions and ordered them, get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide horses for Paul, so that he might be taken safely to the governor Felix. Well, look at this. Paul was escorted to Felix in Caesarea by what? 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen. Wow, that's 470 soldiers to guard one Roman citizen. That is how serious the commander took this threat. He was going to protect this Roman citizen. What a privilege to be a Roman citizen. Anyway, the soldiers took Paul to Felix, gave the letter that the commander had written to Felix, and Felix ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace. Eventually they came down. The high priest Sanhedrin and various other people came down Caesarea, and a lawyer named Tertullus was going to represent them. Oh, have a lawyer do it now. Let's have the big, let's do it properly. Anyway, in his speech, he accused the Way of being a sect. Now, this may be another attempt to try to show that this group of Christian Jews, this Christianity, the Way, was not a licensed religion, or it was a new religion without traditions. Rome was very free, giving people freedom of worship, but they liked to know about religion. They didn't like new traditions without tradition, and there were some religions were banned, particularly if it involved human sacrifice or cannibalism. They were banned totally, completely. And this Tertullus, I think, was trying to get into Felix's mind that the Way was a sect. However, Paul replied, and he had his say. And Felix, who was well acquainted with the Way, knew really it was all contained within Judaism, because it was all to do with this Jewish Messiah teaching of the Old Testament. And his wife was a Jewess anyway, so he adjourned the proceedings. And he says, when Lysias the commander comes, he said to Paul, I will decide your case. He ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but to give him some freedom and to permit his friends and take care of his needs. So this was not going to be an arduous imprisonment. He was kept in Herod's palace. He could have his friends visit him, and they could look after him. So anyway, after Paul had been there several days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. So somehow or other Felix wanted to know more. Maybe his wife wanted to know more. Who knows? She was a Jewess. But it's not quite like that. Honourable motives? Well, maybe mixed motives. Acts 24:26-27. It tells us that at the same time, Felix was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe to set him free. He obviously didn't know this man. Anyway, he sent for Paul frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, he kept him in prison 2 years. Kept him in Herod's palace for 2 years. Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. But Paul had been kept in prison because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews. He just left Paul in prison. All right. So the new governor arrives, Festus, and he does what is normal. Festus goes up to Jerusalem, sees the leadership of the Jews and talks to them. All right, that's what happened. Any new governor would go and see the leaders of the country he was governor over, to make himself known to them, to get to know them, to find out certain things, what was important, what wasn't important. I don't know, good political thing to do. So Festus goes to Jerusalem, and then Festus interviews Paul in Caesarea. And no doubt wanting to curry favor with the Jewish leadership, he says to Paul, "Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges?" Paul knew if he was taken out of this safe haven of Herod's palace and taken up to Jerusalem, he would have been killed. So Paul answered, "I appeal to Caesar." Wow. That was a sensible thing for Paul to do. Why? Well, in Acts 23:11 it says, "You must also testify in Rome, because if you appeal to Caesar, to Rome you will go." That's what Felix said. But the Lord said, "You must also testify in Rome." So if that's the way I'm going to get to Rome, says Paul, that's the way I'll get to Rome. Maybe Paul was trying to help God out here. I don't know. Anyway, he also knew that under Roman law, after he'd appealed to Caesar, once he got to Rome, his accusers would have to turn up within 2 years, or else he would be let go. Simple as that. They had to turn up for 2 years. So Paul thought, probably, right, okay, 2 years. Well, will the Sanhedrin, will the high priest, will any of those religious people in Jerusalem leave the holy city? Will they actually go to Rome? Will they come to Rome? I wouldn't have thought so. Now, did they? Did they turn up? Well, we'll find out. Maybe next time. In Acts 25:13, a few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Yes, Festus was looking after Samaria and Judea. I think Agrippa was in charge of the northern area, up Galilee way, adjoining him. So he came to see him. Good thing, good political decision. Anyway, they have a meeting and Agrippa says, "I'd like to hear this man." So they have a big, Agrippa's there with Bernice and Festus is there with his entourage. And wow, it's all going well. Give chance for Paul to speak. Anyway, Paul speaks and everything's going well. And then he gets to the point where he says the Messiah would suffer and as the first to rise from the dead would bring the message of light to his own people and to the Gentiles. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense. "You're out of your mind," he said. He shouted. Your great learning is driving you insane." Well, what caused Festus to interrupt? Well, it's his thing again about people, Jesus being raised from the dead. As we had seen this. We'd seen this with the philosophers in Athens. They sneered when he got to that point. It was becoming a trouble in Corinth. Paul had to write them a letter to talk about Christ's resurrection, to prove that Christ rose from the dead. Anyway, slowly all the proceedings come to an end. And Agrippa says to Festus, "Well, my view is this. This is all within Judaism. This man could have been set free if he'd not appealed to Caesar." Okay, he's appealed to Caesar. So you've got to go to Rome, because your case will either be heard by Caesar himself or by the Senate. So Paul, off to Rome. Well, how long a journey would that take? And what happened on that journey? Well, we'll see about that next time.